And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. We got a lot to get to today. We're going to answer a lot of questions. We're going to cover Vinny the Chin Gigante. And yeah, I did this before, but I'm doing it again for a specific reason. But we got to get to some news and notes first, because if you don't live in New York, you probably don't know this happened. But there was an attempted mob hit Wednesday morning. Obviously, the person who was shot is still alive. He is expected to recover. Which is amazing, considering what happened. But allegedly a reputed Bonanno crime family associate by the name of Salvatore Sally Daz Zatola was leaving his home probably around like 6:40 in the morning, was ambushed outside of his house. He was shot in the chest and the right hand and had a graze wound to his head. And the interesting thing from the police perspective is that they're not sure if it has anything related to the June 12th incident, where Zatola's dad, Sylvester, who is 71, was arrested after squeezing off several rounds at a guy who pulled a gun on him about 7:30 in the morning outside of his Bronx residence. Sylvester Zatola was actually arrested for weapons possession, reckless endangerment, and other charges. He didn't have a permit for a gun, obviously, but this is a big thing. The father is a reputed, allegedly Lucchese family associate, also who was stabbed back in 2017 in the neck and the back when he walked into his home to find three people burglarizing his place. So obviously there is some affiliation, allegedly, according to who both these guys are. But Salvatore Zatola is absolutely okay. He looks like he's going to survive, but this is definitely a mob hit gone wrong. Obviously, somebody can't shoot fucking right, and I'm not making fun of the situation. I'm just saying that obviously, if you shot straight, this guy isn't alive anymore. I'm not really sure why. A lot of people have already contacted me and asked me whether this is an internal family issue or whether there's something else going on. And I got to tell you, looking at it on its face, I don't, it's kind of hard for me to say that it's totally mob related, but then again, who knows? There's lots of crazy things that happen, especially within the Bonanno crime family itself. So I'm not 100% sure, to say the least, but I'm sure in the next coming days, a little more information will filter out. And I think probably law enforcement is probably going to have a pretty quick gauge on what's going on there. We haven't seen this since 2013. The last mob hit in New York was 2013, at least the ones we know about. So it's a little interesting to see this, especially considering that I think it was a couple of weeks ago we talked about how the moratorium on killing people in New York seemed to be all but gone, but it looks like someone is exercising their right to use violence, and that's how the mob works. That's how they've always worked. But once again, these are just allegations about people that are probably unsubstantiated, not validated. Anytime anybody gets shot that has a past like this is what's going to happen. So in my opinion, I think it's a botched mob hit. It looks and smells like it, and if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. There's also some news out of Philadelphia I want to get to, and I debated for a long time how I was going to cover this, because I really don't want to get into it for a lot of different reasons. The first reason is that I may have information that a lot of people don't. I think I've been on the record as saying I do and I do. But there's a process to all of this. If you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, You can type in Joseph Servideo, Carl Chianese, and Michael Galacchio, and there's a massive indictment that came out of New Jersey specifically that is probably remotely going to end up touching Philadelphia in a lot of ways. And the reason why I say that is from this, and I'm going to read directly from the indictment. These are not my words. These are right off the indictment. These are allegations that are made by the federal government. Indictment: did willingly and intentionally conspire and agree with each other and others to distribute and process, distribute and to possess with intent to distribute 50 grams or more of methamphetamines, 100 grams or more of a mixture and substance containing other controlled substances, including fentanyl, tramadol, which are all Schedule 1, 2, and 4 violations. Also mentioned there's physical surveillance, wiretaps, phone calls, text messages, wiretapped meetings. There were controlled purchases of heroin, fentanyl, tramadol, and methamphetamines from an agent, which is not good news. According to the affidavit, CS1, who is Anthony Pergiano, pretty much has provided the inner workings of the mob, the hierarchy, and etc. He's been a rat since 2015. But there's something else that I wanted to mention, and this is the important part. June 8th of 2016, there was a meeting between CS1 and UCE1, and they had a meeting allegedly with multiple members of the Philadelphia La Cosa Nostra. Allegedly, the meeting was in regards to trafficking narcotics, mainly marijuana, which, it's really not a narcotic as far as I'm concerned. But that meeting was recorded. I don't know who was at the meeting. There's always rumors. But that's not good. Then on June 13th of 2016, Servideo has a meeting with CS1, and he actually tells the rat that the Philadelphia hierarchy told everybody, especially him, not to do anything illegal, stay out of trouble, but he's recorded as saying, "But I do what I fucking want." So take that as you may. To my knowledge, there are 4 cooperators. 2 have only been acknowledged via indictment and in affidavits. Obviously, George Anastasia has come out and said pretty much the same thing. I think my information is a little more solid than his. I'm just being honest. It's not a matter of battling George Anastasia, because I do have some nasty shit to say about him in this show. But to my knowledge, there's 4 cooperators. And obviously, 2 of them pretty much, I think, are known by everybody at this point. The other 2 aren't, and one of the names is kind of shocking. I was a bit surprised, but how far this reaches Philadelphia, I'm not really sure. The problem with a situation like this, anytime that you're levying allegations, and they're saying that the hierarchy or made guys from Philadelphia were there to discuss this, if they're caught on a wiretap, they're done. As far as you can't say you weren't there if your voice shows up. That's the first problem. The second problem is that anytime you have something of this gravity, and to my knowledge, there's been 12 associates of Philadelphia who have either been picked up already or who have been served legal paperwork to come to court. That's not a good sign. That's a large number of guys. But the issue becomes is that guys aren't going to take a pinch for everybody else these days. It's just not the way the mob is anymore. There's a lot of weak people. And what ends up typically happening in a situation like this is, you have 3 main guys, then you have the rats, and then all these other guys start to get picked up because they're caught on a wiretap. And then they're going to end up talking. They're going to end up talking. They're going to end up testifying. And this is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, what I have not said publicly that I have said personally to people in my circle is that I always thought that the government offering a deal to Joey Merlino was sort of tongue-in-cheek. And when I say tongue-in-cheek, I don't mean that because he did it and, they were willing to just kind of let it go because of whatever. The point is I think they let it go because I think that they knew that there was this investigation going on in New Jersey that was going to touch Philadelphia, and they were saying to themselves in sort of a coy way, you know what, we can't get them on any of the other shit. Let's get them on the gambling, and that the hope is that they will indict him for this bullshit in New Jersey. I think that's what the government was thinking all along, and I go back to what Judge Sullivan said when he asked the fucking prosecution, why are you giving up? You sat here for months and said you had a slam dunk case. You told the jury you had an open and shut case, and here you are offering a fucking deal to somebody. And they just kind of stammered and stood there like they didn't know what to fucking say. They looked like rookies, like they were from fucking Indiana or whatever, standing in there, didn't know what to say. And something just told me there was more to it. And I think that the hope from their perspective, or at least the way that they could argue it with themselves, other than the fact that they didn't have a case, was that maybe somewhere on the back end of this New Jersey indictment, they could go after Joey Merlino and somebody else. That's what I speculate. I'm not saying that's true, and that's in no way indicative of saying Joey did this or Joey did that or anybody did anything. All I'm saying is the government always has an insurance policy. They have a fucking blank check. They can do whatever the fuck they want, and that's what we're seeing. So I don't know how far this is going to go with Philadelphia. It's just going to depend on who they got and how many people decide they don't want to go to jail. This is what's always been Philadelphia's sort of big toe. It's never guys from within. It's always outsiders. But this time, I can almost say for 100% this is an insider. This is not an outsider. This time is different. It's not a Ron Previty. This is an insider. And I'm almost 100% sure of that. But that's really as far as I want to go with that. I'm sure that as this moves forward, we're going to start to hear more and more about that. And so that sort of leads me to this next part. Albert Anastasia. George Anastasia. All right, look, everybody knows I don't like George. I don't like George for my own fucking reasons. But my problem with him is the latest mob talk shit down that he did. Because here's my thing. First of all, he's not giving you any information, which is fine. Maybe it's a slow fucking week in Philadelphia for him. But the one thing that he did, and this is the reason why I bring it up, if I put something on Twitter and I say this is what somebody else said, this isn't me fucking saying it. It's somebody else. I don't know why I get held accountable by anybody for what somebody else fucking says. But George Anastasia essentially comes out and says the following, that Joey Merlino met with Robert De Niro and another actor, and he's trying to sell his movie rights and all this kind of nonsense, which is absolutely unequivocally not fucking true. What I can tell you and what I think is if Joey even met with Robert De Niro, all right, you got to understand Robert De Niro shooting The Irishman. From what I've heard, if they met, it had more to do with De Niro sort of trying to get the Philadelphia vibe, how to act like a Philadelphia person, what the times were like back then, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anybody that says otherwise is bullshit. The reason why I took an issue with George Anastasia is because he outright fucking lied. He took something he heard, and I know who he heard it from. And if the person that told him that thinks I don't fucking know that, they're out of their minds. This always leads back to the same like 2 or 3 guys. And people just need to be quiet. I don't know why people talk, but in any event, so it gets to them, and they sort of take this idea that he met with Robert De Niro and another actor, which they refuse to name the other actor. It gets as good as Bob De Niro, especially as far as acting goes. So they take a simple little fucking thing, whether it's true or not, really doesn't make a hill of beans to me. But they take that and they morph that into all of a sudden Joey Merlino is going to make his life story and all of this stupid shit that doesn't make. Because I personally give a shit, because I really fucking don't at the end of the day. The reason why I posted it is because invariably what will happen is I will get 100 fucking questions about what that shithead Anastasia puts out. And that's exactly what happened. I went on Twitter and put what I put. Those are his words, not mine. Just because I repeat somebody else's words, 1, don't mean I fucking believe it. 2, don't mean I'm trying to stir the pot. 3, don't mean I have a fucking opinion on the matter. Sometimes I have to get out ahead of the fucking shitstorms. That's the reality of what I do. Be it whether I'm on friendly terms with this person or that person, really doesn't make a hill of beans or a difference in the way I approach things. But I wanted to get out ahead of that because I knew what was going to happen. But once again, people don't go to George Anastasia and say, why are you reporting those lies, George? Because you know that's not true. No. They don't do that. They come at me. So my point of view is this. Go to him. If you got a beef with what the lies that are being created and spun by him, go to him. Don't come to me and complain to me about it. Like I suddenly fucking said something that I didn't say. People like to misconstrue a lot of the shit that I say. And the truth is, that was what somebody else said. That ain't got nothing to do with me. I think I have been on the record for fucking 6 months. Fuck that, 19 fucking years about how I feel about Joey Merlino and all of that. So for anybody to come to me after that much time and somehow try to like make that my fault is fucking bullshit. Because I just repeat what somebody else says. I didn't say I believed it, didn't say people should. I put it out saying that I wanted people to see it because I wanted them to understand what I was going to talk about. And that's the bottom line. So when people come to me, and it wasn't just like one or two people, it was a bunch. But the point is that you can't take something that some other jerk off says and try to lop it on my plate. I've done nothing but fucking defend people to almost to the point where people want to kill me over it. And I think that it comes to a point where you can defend somebody till you're blue in the face, be as loyal as you are till you're blue in the face, but people want their own narrative. And that's okay. People are entitled to have a narrative. I don't have a beef with anybody that takes sort of umbrance with what I say. That's okay. You're entitled to your opinion. What you're not going to fucking do is put words in my mouth and try to create problems for me putting words in my mouth. Because I'm going to tell you the truth. That's some lowbrow, stupid shit. I don't deal with people like that. What I say, I will say to you. I've been honest with a lot of fucking people when I didn't need to be because I know they lied to me. So the point I'm trying to make to you is don't blame me for something somebody else does. If you don't like George Anastasia, well, then don't watch his bullshit. Don't subscribe to his bullshit. Don't act like he's fucking Jesus Christ. If you don't like what he says, email him. Badmouth him. Do what I do. Speak. Don't come at me and blame me for what he says. That's like the most absurd shit I've ever fucking heard in my life. Now, I'm going to also preface that by saying this one last thing. Okay? He lied. It's not true. It's not true. Joey didn't sit down with anybody and discuss doing his life story. All right? None of that's fucking true. But this is also coming from the same guy who wrote a 250-page book filled with fucking lies about other people. So you kind of got to consider the fucking source that it comes from. So, for those that inboxed me and got upset with me because of what I posted on Twitter, take it up with the man yourself. Don't think just because, George Anastasia is this prolific author that you can't say something to him. Because you can. And he's a coward. He ain't going to fight back. He's just going to take it. And he's just going to keep repeating the gossip that is fed to him. That's the problem. Gossip goes to him and he fucking reports it. It's okay if he does it, but I can't do that. But I don't report gossip either. I give you the facts, and that's the way I've always been. And if people don't respect me for that, then there's not much else I can say for them. But I just don't want people putting words in my mouth. I will defend myself at all costs. I always have. I'm not intimidated by nobody. I don't care what your fucking stature is. I don't care who the fuck you are, what fucking corporate ladder you're on, what fucking degree you got, what your fucking pay grade is, what your fucking title is. It doesn't matter to me because I'm a fucking man and I'm going to have a debate with somebody if they want to try to put me somewhere or put words in my mouth that don't exist. It's that fucking simple. All right? So, all that being said, it's not to knock anybody I know personally, not to knock anybody that harassed me about it. It's just that I think people have a tendency of looking at something and not fucking reading it. Read it. So what am I supposed to do? Not report something that everybody else is already fucking reporting? Did I go on fucking YouTube and start, hey, this person's going to do this and this? I don't do that. I don't do that at all. In fact, I'll take it one step further than that. There were things that I fucking knew that I didn't even come out with out of respect for people. So before you just start chastising me and shit, maybe you should just kind of respect the fact that I've been loyal. Because that's what it's about. It's about loyalty. Maybe some people need a lesson on that. I don't know. Maybe I'm fucking wrong. All right. So we got a bunch of questions. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to get to all your questions and more. And listen, just in final about this, I got no problem with anybody taking an issue with what I say. You know what? We can have a friendly banter, a friendly discussion about it. But at the end of the day, don't put words in my mouth. Because there's a lot of people that keep putting words in my mouth and things get back to people that aren't fucking true. And it starts off as a simple conversation about something. Next thing you know, I said a bunch of crazy shit. It's not true. It's not true. And I'm going to tell you the secret about me. What you're hearing right now is what I do. But you catch me in a bar, in a restaurant, I don't talk about nobody. I'm sure as fuck not going to mention nobody's names. What's the point? Who I am as a person, I am not defined by knowing Mickey Mouse. I'm not defined by knowing Donald Duck. That doesn't define me. That doesn't make me who I am. All that is an extension of people I know. And so for me, I don't get my fucking, my what do you call it? Your jollies off? I don't get my jollies off by knowing anybody. Because at the end of the day, that's them. I still got to wake up and put my pants on the same way I do every morning. I don't look in the mirror and go, ooh, I know Carmine Fatico, so that makes me a tough guy. That's bullshit. Who you know doesn't make you tough. It's who you are on the inside. And that's the most important thing. So anything that I've ever done isn't for accolades, isn't for friendships. It's because it's the right thing to do. It's called being loyal. And you know what? If I go to hell for being loyal, so be it. A lot of other people are too. Be right back on Mob Talk Radio. In my travels, I'm always looking for a clothing brand that I feel like represents me. Anybody can go to a store and buy a t-shirt with a gimmick, but if you believe in 3 core values like I do, loyalty, honor, and respect, then look no further than Omerta Brand Clothing. You can catch them at omertamia.com, OMERTAMIA.com, with locations in Europe, California, Boston, Brooklyn, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Washington. They have a great clothing line with hats, shirts, sweatshirts, keychains, anything you might need, stickers. You want the rats to stop snitching? Go right out and get yourself a sticker. But if you want to live your life by the gentleman's code, look no further than Omerta Brand Clothing. Welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. I actually thought I was going to go off on Anastasia a little more than that, but you know what? There's no point. George does what he does. He's a liar, and that's just the bottom line. You like him? Fine. Go ahead and like him. I don't give a fuck. All right, question number 1. Anything left on the Rochester, New York Mafia? Yes, they have a small crew that's still a little bit active, but it's not like it was. Buffalo's really the main territory because that draws the line between Canada and the United States, and that is a bigger territory, but they're still there. Listen, the mob is everywhere. I get a lot of questions all the time about, is the mob here? Is the mob there? You name a place that's got a racket, the mob is there in some fashion or form. Okay. Oh boy. All right. In your opinion, do you feel that a part of the downfall of the mob was that mobsters became too American? Most of the top past legends were mainly immigrants from Italy. I think the best way to answer that is by saying yes. I think what has sort of happened, and I don't think it's really, first of all, you got to understand the time period that we're talking about here. We go back to the 20s, 30s, 40s. Most were immigrants, maybe in the 50s, but it was also, the Sicilians brought it over from Italy, and there was a different mindset. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now is, especially with the generation of 30-year-old gangsters, they didn't grow up having it tough. They didn't grow up in the slums in New York. They didn't grow up in the slums of Philly. They pretty much grew up, for the most part, spoon-fed, silver spoon. There are exceptions to that, but most of them grew up with money. They didn't grow up the tough way, and they decided to join a life of crime for whatever the reason may be. But I think that's a lot of the reason why you see the downfall today. I think also that the standards, the morals, the viewpoints are different than they were. Everything evolves, right? When guys came to this country back in the 20s and 30s, they were promised a land with the streets paved to gold. And when they get here, they find out a very different scenario. And they had to do what they had to do because they had to not only feed themselves, but they had to feed 12, 13, 14 children, siblings. So they didn't have the options. And you know what? Maybe that's a cop-out, and maybe they did, but they chose not to. But a lot of times, when people were poor back in the Depression era, they were really fucking poor. And they had to do what they had to do. It's a little different today. I mean, I think the idea of fucking food stamps and all that kind of shit was non-existent in those days. So I think that if you're going to base that answer being yes, I don't think it's necessarily because the majority of past guys that came over were immigrants. I don't think that's necessarily it, because there were a lot of successful guys that were in that style of life that were very successful, and they weren't immigrants. I think it just comes down to everything evolves. Everything like post 1960 is different. It's very different. And there's exceptions to that, but I don't think it's necessarily because of immigrants. I think your Carlo Gambinos and some other guys, Lucky Lucianos, those guys were immigrants. They were very successful. And the difference being is that when they came to this country, and it's with any ethnic group, you attach yourself to those like you. The Italians stuck together. The Irish stuck together. The Germans stuck together. You stuck with your own people. And the one thing that made the Italians so much brighter in that sense is they didn't tell on each other. They kept it to themselves. It was all for the, you know what? I don't pay attention to what Jimmy does on the corner. Jimmy gives me $5. That buys me a couple loaves of bread every week, helps support my family. In fact, I had a very, very similar conversation tonight with somebody. I'm not going to tell you who it was, but we were sitting outside of a social club talking, smoking cigars and whatever, and he said to me, who am I and who would I be to judge anybody to tell them how to feed their family? What they do is what they do. I wipe my hands. I don't see nothing. I don't pay attention. Whatever they do, I'm never going to tell anybody how to earn for his family and take care of his kids and his relatives. And that's the mindset. That's old Italian mindset. And mind you, this guy is not old. He's probably in his 50s, late 40s, early 50s. He's a very, very wise guy, a great guy. But it's that sort of Sicilian mentality, and that's the one thing that I think that a lot of these guys on the streets today don't have. They don't have the experience, they don't have the wisdom, and they don't have the right mentality. Guys that had to earn it, guys that had to do it to eat, to survive, those are the ones that were successful. The ones that had it all growing up and decided to be bumbling fucking morons and they end up telling on everybody, those are the ones today that ruined the mob. All right. Question 3. You don't mention Joey Merlino very much anymore. Why is that? I don't talk about, well, hello, I just talked about Joey a little bit. I don't, what's there to say? What's there to say at this point? Other than the shit's going on in New Jersey. You know, obviously Joey has sentencing coming up in September. And I think there's a couple of questions based on that later on in the show. It's not really, listen, you know, not knocking Joey or anybody else, but I mean, you know, it's like if I talked about, well, like John A-Light all the time, which I used to do, it gets old, right? Nobody wants to hear that all the time. And what's there to say? What's there to say at this point? You want me to gossip? I don't gossip about anybody. So it's not so much that I'm not talking about him for any other reason other than I don't want to get into that, but I think it's safe to say that I'm going to talk about him a little bit today, so maybe hopefully that'll suffice and answer your question. All right. What mob figure would you like to see played on the silver screen and why? Who would be the leading protagonist? Honest to God, I want to see a Jimmy Burke film. And the reason why is because Jimmy Burke's an Irish guy. Not that I have anything like against my Italian brothers or whatever, but what Jimmy Burke was able to accomplish, the amount of power that Jimmy Burke had, the kind of archetype that Jimmy Burke was. That's what I want to see. Yeah, we saw that a little bit in Goodfellas, but I thought De Niro played him very fucking tame compared to what Jimmy Burke was like in real life. And I think there's so much more to Jimmy Burke's story than just the Goodfellas angle. If you haven't listened to my Jimmy Burke episode, go back and listen to it. It's really good. And there's a lot of information on Jimmy Burke, and I think the fact that he was able to attain such a high status, being Irish, that he was feared and respected and trusted, that says a lot about his character, and that's a story I want to see. I don't want to see, you know, some of these other half-ass stories about people. It just doesn't make sense. But I think for my money, Jimmy Burke really would be sort of especially when you know Jimmy Burke's childhood like I do. He didn't have it fucking easy. He really didn't. He had it very, very rough. And I'm not in any way saying that gives him the permission to do what he did. That's not what I'm saying. I just think that when somebody comes from such a shitty fucking situation and turns themselves into something, even if that's something, according to law enforcement, is a gangster and et cetera, something to marvel at that. Making yourself something is very important to me. It's part of my core beliefs. So Jimmy Burke is who I would want to see. Let's see. All right, I know you are against Joe Bonanno for writing his book. I was wondering why you don't have the same issue with Lucky Luciano. Didn't he talk to a biographer? First of all, my issue with Joe Bonanno isn't really necessarily about the book. It's everything that he says he was that he wasn't. It's all the bullshit that he pulled with the commission, thinking he was above everybody else. It was the way he treated the guys underneath of him, which led to what we still see today from the Bonanno crime family. So it's not necessarily his book per se, it's everything that he did. The book was just like the fucking icing on the cake for me. I think that if he had just kept it to his own fucking fantasy of The Godfather, I don't think anybody would give a shit. But once again, he takes credit for things that aren't really accurate. He ratted on a bunch of people, which really wasn't cool. He was fucking shelved in the mob. So that's what my issue with him is. As far as Luciano sitting down with the biographer, once again, we're going to talk about terminology here. Sitting down. Sitting down isn't writing. Sitting down is talking. There's a big difference between talking to a biographer and not going through with it versus an asshole who fucking not only makes a film about his life, which was laughable, making his son Bill some sort of tough guy in the street, which is a big fucking joke, but there's a difference between sitting down and talking to a journalist and having a journalist write your story. There's a big difference. So that's what my issue was with Joe Bonanno. All right, based on the 5 families, the tough guys joined, the smart guys joined, the earners joined, the psychos joined, least capable. This is probably going to get me in trouble, but fuck it. All right, based on the 5 families, the tough guys joined, I'm going to say the Gambinos. The smart guys joined the Genoveses. The earners joined the Gambinos. The psychos joined the Colombos. The least capable guys, probably the Colombos too, but maybe the Lucchese's got some psychos too, so that could go either way. All right. Who's the most powerful, most active family in the United States outside of New York? Probably, I got to go outside of New York, Canada. Obviously, the Rizzutos and Drenggeta. Those are the 2 powerhouses. There's a lot of Sicilian factions in New York as well. So I think realistically, wow. In the U.S., outside of... All right, so if you want me to pick a state, I'm probably going to say outside of New York City, probably the most powerful and active. Wow. Philadelphia is pretty active. So I'll give Philadelphia the active, but powerful, that's a tough one. That's really a tough one. Florida's sort of defunct. They're not defunct. Florida's got some stuff going on, but I don't want to get into that right now. Rhode Island's up in fucking shambles per the usual. Kansas City still has people. Detroit still has people. Probably Chicago. I think really Chicago outside of New York is probably the most powerful. All right, in your opinion, who are some of the most feared mob guys? But were most feared mob guys, and they were straight up mob guys. Roy Demeo, obviously. Greg Scarpa, Tommy Pitera, Barney Bellomo, allegedly, who is active. I would say the most feared mob guy, if the names that I'm using are actually truthful, Barney Bellomo by far is the most feared guy. All right, so you're sitting at a table with Nicky Scarfo, Roy Demeo, and Tommy Pitera. You have a fork to defend. You only have a fork to defend yourself, and all 3 are angry at you. Your chances of survival. What would you do? I don't know who the fuck asked me this, but if I'm sitting at a table with Nicky Scarfo Jr., Roy Demeo, and Tommy Pitera, I don't think I'm leaving the fucking table. I'll be honest with you, especially if they're mad. But if I only got a fork, I'm going to jab Nicky Scarfo as hard as I can in the fucking throat. That's the first thing I'm going to do. He's the old one of the 2. Maybe I got a chance. Then I look over. Roy Demeo's a little hefty. He can't run. Maybe I got a chance with him. I hit him with a plate. Tommy Pitera, I don't know if I can get away with. That guy was a fucking animal. So I think what happens is I shank fucking Nicky Scarfo. I fucking whacked Demeo with a plate, but before I can get 3 feet, Pitera puts 2 in my head. So there you go. I don't know why. That question is lunacy. Get the fuck out of here. First of all, I'd never go to a fucking dinner if those 3 asked me. 2, chances are if they're angry at me, I'm never going to get there anyway. Right. All right, of all the mob guys you've ever been around, who intimidated you the most or who was the most violent? a guy by the name of Sal Catone. I've been around a lot of mob guys my whole entire life. Salvatore Catone was by far the most fucking mental, the toughest, and he's probably the guy you guys have never fucking heard about ever. And there's a reason for that. And there is sort of a question that has to do with that, and I'll go into that in a minute. But Sal Catone was probably the most vicious fucking guy I ever met in my life. It rattled me. Very few people rattled me. There was I believe it or not, I'll sort of tongue-in-cheek this a little bit, and the person who this involves will know. I haven't been rattled in years. I'll be honest with you. People don't rattle me. Normally, I'm not caught off guard. But I was in a situation 3 or 4 months ago in a courtroom, and somebody had a little beef with me over something I said, and that's okay. He was in his right to be a little upset. But I'm going to tell you what, he rattled me. He sat down next to me, stared right into my eyes, and this is what he says, and I shit you not. Do you know me? Do you got a fucking problem with me? Are we friends? Do we know each other? You want to say the shit that you said a couple months ago to my face? It rattled me. It really did rattle me. And it's not because I wasn't going to say what I had to say or whatever like that. I honestly fucking don't remember what I say from week to week. I really, honest to God, don't. I don't have a transcript that I read off of. So, my way of approaching it was to apologize. Obviously, I needed to, and I did. But he did rattle me. I'm not going to lie. This guy rattled me a little bit, so I'm sure he's getting a good chuckle out of that, you fucking asshole. But yeah, he rattled me. But after that, I think we became kind of friends, and he's a good guy, a respectable guy, and I sort of have a fondness for him now. I didn't before, obviously, because I listened to what a lot of other people said, and I got it wrong. He's a very jovial, nice guy, and it was that experience was something. Anybody that ever asks me, I sort of tell the story. I don't ever mention his name publicly, but I tell the story, and they all kind of fucking laugh because he startled me. He startled me. Tough. He's a tough guy too. He really is. But he's a nice guy, and we got to know each other a little bit, and I have a lot of respect for that guy. So if he's listening, I hope the summer is treating you well, sir. All right. Who's the most famous mobster you've ever been on a first name basis with? There's a lot. I don't know if I want to say certain people just because maybe somebody's active or not active. But Carmine Persico, I am very, very, very good friends with some Ndrangheta guys from Italy. Ray Patriarca, obviously. Don't want to go into that either. But the Ndrangheta guys, you guys wouldn't know. Nobody really knows. And that sort of leads to this next question, which is, Jeff, what's your Pizza Connection relation? Because we've heard you talk about it before. All right, here's my Pizza Connection relationship. Obviously, at the time that this happened, the Pizza Connection, you can look it up and see how that all operated. I don't want to go into a whole entire Pizza Connection here. However, I met 3 brothers. Where I met them isn't important. They owned an Italian restaurant that I frequented all the time. It took me 5 years or so to kind of get to know Pietro Catone, who is a dear friend of mine. And turns out, him and his 2 brothers, there's 3 of them, the Catone brothers, were actively involved in the Pizza Connection. They all did federal time for a long time. 2 of the brothers were tossed out of the country and thrown back to Italy, but Sal Catone, of the 3, was fucking a nutcase. Wanted to kill an FBI agent and all kinds of crazy shit. It's been well documented, so it's not like I'm making this up. But that's my connection to them. All 3 were involved in it. They were obviously moving drugs in and out of pizzerias. They were torching pizzerias. They were murder, mayhem, and all that kind of good stuff. But I know all 3 of them very, very well. Sal still kind of scares the shit out of me. I'm not going to lie to you. He's a little fucking nuts. But these guys are from Sicily. They operate on a whole sort of a different level. Of the 3, I'm closer to Giuseppe and Pietro. Pietro's like a father to me, so him and I go way back. He's down in Florida, believe it or not. But and Giuseppe's back in Italy, so is Sal. But that's my connection to them. I met a lot of people through them. who mostly are dead at this point. But that's how I know them. They've obviously are out of that life for the most part. Sal went on to do his own thing. Giuseppe's in Italy, married, has kids, grandkids. And Pietro, opens, he runs restaurants and stuff like that. So these guys long left that lifestyle a long time ago. But that's my connection to it. And they wouldn't care if I talked about it because that's their past. It's public knowledge, so it's not a big deal. Plus, I made a phone call before I even decided to answer that to make sure it was all right. And also, when the FBI kicked in my fucking doors, they were after Pietro at the time, too. And that's the guy that I went to explain my situation to him because I didn't need anybody running back saying, oh, you talked to the FBI, he's a rat, and all that shit. So I went to him first, which was the right thing to do. But I've talked about that before. Maybe I'll go into more details down the road as far as that goes. Okay. Why did Luciano just not whack Genovese? Why did he put up with all his shit? That's a question that I wish that I could really answer you with. I think it was first of all, ultimately Luciano set up Genovese in the end, as well as Costello and Gambino. They were all in on Genovese getting his ass locked up for drug trafficking. I'm going to tell that story sort of when we talk about Vincent the Chin because it's a part of the story. But I don't know why he put up with this shit. Especially after the Appalachian thing. That would have been it for me, but I think Luciano had reservations because he knew Genovese was going to try to take over. And sometimes it's a lot better to just sort of stay idle. Stay idle and then take your chance. And when they did, he paid for it. He got even. Death or prison. What do you think is going to piss off Vito Genovese more? Imagine Vito Genovese spending the rest of his fucking life in a cell screaming that he ever gets out, he's going to kill Costello, he's going to kill everybody. And he's in a prison the rest of his life. So who got the last laugh there? All right. What are your thoughts on Once Upon a Time in America besides it being long? I never liked it. First of all, I don't like James Woods all that much. I mean, I've liked him in a couple of things he does, but I just thought it was too long-winded. It's a good story. I think if it had been traditionally really hardcore Jewish gangster type of stuff, I think it would have been different. But I just think what it really was a riff off of The Godfather. It attempted to do what The Godfather did, and to me, it's not one of my favorite movies. I'd rather watch Mean Streets, but that's just me. All right, if the Genoveses are the Ivy League of organized crime, why does everybody keep saying the Gambinos are the strongest? Very simple and easy. The Gambinos have zips. The Genoveses are the Ivy League of organized crime. At least they were back in the 80s to the 90s. I still believe they are, but the Gambinos have a lot of zips. The Gambinos have a lot of ties into Canada at this point. That's what makes them the strongest. Sometimes it's not necessarily the amount of number. It's the sheer fucking willpower. All right, is the outfit more dominant or powerful than any of the five families? Absolutely not. 1960, absolutely. I think that they could rival a lot of the five families. Today, absolutely not. And the reason why is they've lost all their fucking political power. When you lose political power and you don't own judges and courts and politicians, you lose a lot of your power. When Costello was at the helm with the Genovese, which would become the Genovese crime family, he really was the reason why this family made that much money. It was because of his political powers. But Chicago these days doesn't have the political power whatsoever. When you don't own things like Tammany Hall, like a lot of gangsters did back in the old New York days, when you don't own politicians, that's a game changer. So I don't think that the outfit is more dominant in any sense of the word in comparison to the five families whatsoever. All right, did the commission ever think about changing the Bonanno crime family name after everything that happened within the family? At one point, Joey Merlino went to John Gotti, and one of the things was Gotti was going to try to get him a seat back on the commission, and Merlino wanted to change the Bonanno crime family to the Merlino crime family. Thank God that didn't happen, because look at what a fucking disaster Merlino turned out to be. Obviously, they said no to the commission idea. The Chin said, fuck no, that's not going to happen. And once again, the Bonannos are paying a penalty for what Joe Bonanno did. Bottom line. For multiple reasons. That's why the Bonannos don't have a seat on the commission, and that's likely why they won't, because it goes back that far. Appalachian pissed off so many people, and then Bonanno's behavior after the fact that he went behind everybody's back and wanted to kill Gambino and everybody else, and Joe Colombo says, not so much, and Joe Colombo ends up sort of kind of just telling on Joe Bonanno and the plan, and in turn, Colombo gets his own crime family out of the deal, and Joe Bonanno gets shelved. All right. This is a question I debated touching all night, but I'm going to. With the Gambino family being in construction back in the 80s, do you think Trump had any shady deals with them? Absolutely. Listen, the reality is this. Donald Trump was in the construction business heavily in the 80s. Obviously, there were ties with him and Nicky Scarfo, Scarf Inc., obviously ties with Philip Leonetti. Listen, he was putting casinos in fucking Atlantic City. Of course, he had back deal stuff with the mob. He also had back deal stuff with the mob in New York back in those days. But what's funny to me is you guys say it because if Donald Trump wasn't the president, you guys wouldn't be talking about this. Every fucking construction guy in this city and every other city pays a kickback. That's the reality of doing fucking business. He didn't do anything else that nobody before him or after him hasn't done. So, and listen, I'm not a Trump fan. I'm really not. But I think that when people ask questions like this, and I'm not knocking the person that asked the question, but the reality is, of course, there's shady deals. There's shady deals in every fucking government, even to the mayor's office, for fuck's sake. So, absolutely, do I think that there were kickbacks and shady deals? Of course there were. Of course there were. All right. Has the recording of four guys being made in 34 Guild Street, Medford, Mass. ever been released to the public? No, and I don't think it will be. All right. Roy Demeo or Mad Sam? Who was more psychotic? Mad Sam, I think, was more psychotic. Anybody that puts a fucking ice pick through somebody's balls into a chair is pretty fucking psychotic. Who was more feared, Demeo or Mad Sam? Probably Mad Sam because he was not logical. Demeo, look, it was ends that justifies the means with Roy Demeo. Mad Sam DiStefano had fucking delusions and was schizophrenic. He would kill you because if he thought he saw you like touching a fucking goat or something. This is the guy that would bring women home and make his wife watch him have sex with them. He was a real deviant, real fucking sick fuck. Who is the better earner? Obviously, Roy Demeo. Roy Demeo made a ton of money in porn. Roy Demeo made a ton of money in the Kuwaiti chop shop, shipping cars over to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Roy Demeo was a fucking money maker. Who held more power in their respected families? Roy Demeo, I think, held more power because Sam DiStefano, everybody just didn't, you never knew what he was going to do from one day to the next. But I think Roy's big problem was Roy ended up killing too much. He got the Gravano sickness where anybody that sort of put his business in jeopardy or his money in jeopardy, he killed. And he went from being a guy whose ends justified the means to a guy who just did it because I think he fucking enjoyed it. And that's really, there's multiple reasons for why Roy Demeo got clipped, but that's sort of the beginning of it. All right. Do you think Gotti would have been boss if Neil was appointed boss and not Paul? Absolutely. This is another conversation I had with somebody else tonight who was talking about Neil. If Carlo had just named Neil boss, and then he puts Castellano as underboss, Castellano still ends up technically going away on the commission trial, and Gotti would have taken over at that point. I just, we can argue this apples and oranges all day long and devil's advocate here, but I do think that Gotti ultimately still would have taken over just because of his toughness and the way he was going to approach things. I think ultimately that's what would have happened. And maybe there's people that have other opinions, and that's fine too. Okay. Jim Woods, my favorite. His daughter also messages me all the time. Jimmy's a good friend of mine. Jim Woods, was John Gotti the boss of bosses? I don't think so. I think that's a perception. I really think that at the time that John Gotti took over, I'll be honest with you, this may offend people, but I think that Vinny Gigante had a lot more fucking power to the extent where I think that people were a little concerned about how John Gotti took over, and I think that that's a fair assessment. I don't think John Gotti was the boss of bosses. Maybe he thought he was. I can't put thoughts or words into his head, but I think that realistically, Vincent Gigante was probably of the two. If you're going to put a moniker like that on somebody, I think Vincent Gigante is the guy. Castellano was considered to be the boss of boss. I think he also put a fucking title on his head too. What happened after he got whacked? Did it pass on to the chin, Gotti, or did nobody have sufficient power? First of all, the boss of bosses thing, I don't really believe in, because Luciano got rid of that for a reason, because of Massarias and some of these other assholes that came along and wanted that title. Joe Bonanno wanted that title. There's a lot of Vito Genovese came along and wanted that title. So I think that people call somebody boss of bosses. I don't think anybody looked at any of these guys that way, and I don't think any of them considered themselves. Maybe, I think Vincent Gigante probably considered himself that, and probably John Gotti did too, I'd imagine. But the reality is, I don't think there was one above another. That's not the way this thing was set up. It was supposed to be divided, and it was supposed to be equal partnership, and I think that ultimately there are some guys that had more of a say than others. And that's just, I think, reality is, if you're going to say boss of bosses, I think Carlo Gambino was boss of bosses for a long time. And after he died, I think that was pretty much it. I think ultimately after John Gotti goes to prison for the rest of his life, Vincent Gigante becomes boss of bosses, if there is such a thing. Once again, I think it just comes down to your narrative and what you think. Okay. Should Joey Merlino be given a lesser sentence at his upcoming hearing, considering the recent Supreme Court ruling legalizing gambling? Okay, so what this person is saying is, should Joey catch a break because they're legalizing sports gambling, and he pled guilty to a sports gambling charge, which he only made $2,000, all right? People win more money off fucking scratcher lottery tickets than they don't do fucking time. Difference is, the government gets their kickback, they shut the fuck up. All right, here's my thing. When it comes to sentencing guidelines, you're not getting sentenced just for the crime itself. There's like a 12-point fucking bulletin that a judge goes by. There's a point system that he goes by, and that point system has a lot of different variables. Was there violence involved? How much money was involved? How many people got hurt as a result? What is this defendant's past crimes? What is the defendant's past history with legal problems? And those are all things that a federal judge will take into consideration under sentencing guidelines. Under the guidelines of where Joey is at, he's only looking realistically at 2 years max, I think. So, while I totally fucking unequivocally agree that Joey shouldn't spend a fucking day in jail, because I don't think what he did was a fucking crime. Everybody fucking gambles. Anybody that sits in a fucking bar and fucking does the parlay bets should be in prison then. It's ridiculous. It's a bullshit charge. It's the only thing that they could get to stick. Judge Sullivan is sort of a prick, and he's probably going to hammer him, but should he get lesser charges? I don't think Judge Sullivan's going to really give a fuck that the law has changed, because when the crime was allegedly committed, there was still the law intact. So while I argue that Joey didn't do nothing wrong and he shouldn't do a fucking 4 minutes in a fucking cell, in fact, if I could do his time for him, I would. Let Judge Sullivan put me in for a year and a half. Let Joey go do his thing. I'll take a fucking gambling charge. Why not? Right? Because I've done it. I've bookmaked. I've gambled. I've done all of that shit. This is nothing new. But the problem is that a judge really looks at a lot of different bulletins and a lot of different points, and there's a point structure for what a judge decides. I think it's bullshit. I think it should just come down to, okay, did he kill anybody? No. Did he rob anybody? No. Did he win money betting on sports? Absolutely. Okay, so you know what, Your Honor? Of $2,000, I owe you, I don't know, $450. Here's $450. Go fuck your mother. I'm out of here. Let's go have a nice day. That's the way it should be. I would give anything to see a fucking guy get a gambling charge and pay his tax and see the government go after him. If Joey pays his tax, how's it a fucking crime? How's it a fucking crime? You go on your phone, you got 50, 60, 70, 100 different fucking betting places you can go to. They're all offshore. So if you're going to allow these things to be on the fucking internet, right? You're going to allow Vegas to do it. It's okay there. It's ridiculous. It's bullshit. It's a bullshit charge. So really, realistically, at the end of the day, you're going to punish Joey Merlino because he gambled. Who's he hurting? He's hurting himself. There's not a commission of a crime. He's not sticking a gun to somebody and say, give me your fucking money. I'm not paying you to fucking vig. Or you owe me $7,000 off my bet. Or a fucking bookmaker comes in and says, yeah, you owe me 10. You better give it to me. There's going to be a problem. And Joey clips him. There's none of that going on. This is just a simple matter of a guy fucking gambling. You know, how many times have you been in a bar and says, you know what, I bet you $20 fucking Philadelphia wins. And guess what happens? Boop. You lose, you pay the guy. You can go to jail for that because the government didn't get their fucking tax. That's all it is. This is about tax. You know? I'll pay Joey's fucking tax. Joey, call me. Tell me what the tax is. I'll fucking pay it. Maybe we can get you out of this mess. It's just stupid. It really is stupid. I think gambling's a dumb fuck charge. You're not hurting nobody. In fact, if you want to go after somebody, don't go after the motherfucker that places the bet. Go after the motherfucker that takes the bet. If you really want to get technical about this, how is what Joey did wrong in the grand scheme of things? You mean to tell me I can give you $10, put it on this team, and I win, you pay me? Okay. Why aren't you going after the fucking companies that are fucking not paying their fucking taxes? But you're going to go after Joey? Get the fuck out of here. That shit really pisses me off. And for anybody that comes to me and says, oh, here he goes, defending Joey again. That's not the point. I would defend a fucking cross-eyed nun with a bullwhip and a bottle of Jack Daniels in her fucking hand over a gambling charge. He's not hurting nobody. Everybody fucking gambles. You want to know what a fucking gamble is? Me doing this show is a fucking gamble. Me getting up and crossing the motherfucking street in the morning, half hungover, you know, going to get cigarettes or whatever the fuck, crossing in front of a car. That's a motherfucking gamble. But who am I hurting? Just myself. Car hits me, I'm fucking dead. So the idea that a judge should lessen it, yeah, sure, of course, a judge should lessen it. It's a bullshit charge. But the problem is that judges don't go by morality issues. Judges go by their little point system, which is, okay, has Joey Merlino ever hurt anybody physically? Nope. Has Joey Merlino ever been convicted of murder? Nope. Has Joey Merlino ever been convicted of racketeering? Yep. Has Joey Merlino ever killed a fucking nun with a steel dildo? Nope. So look, the bottom line for me is this, and it always will be this. He did nothing wrong. You know, and all this is the government trying to even it up. People can say to me whatever the fuck they want about Joey Merlino. I have long been a proponent. I like Joey. He's a good guy. And I don't really care what anybody else thinks. I don't care what A, B, C, D, and E thinks about what I think about Joey. Everybody who has met Joey likes Joey. I've not heard a single person say a single bad thing about Joey Merlino. Everybody loves Joey Merlino. You know, I haven't heard not one fucking person has come to me and said, you know that guy Joey, you know. Nobody says that. Nobody says that. And listen, people are complicated, you know, but the idea that gambling is some sort of horrible fucking felony, if that's the case, I should have gotten a death sentence for the fucking bookmaking I fucking did. Or the fucking betting that I did, or the parlay slips that I ran for years. Didn't pay tax on that. 350 fucking goddamn, what do you call it, car dealerships I had under my thing. You know? And the guy that I was partnered with got caught. Did he rat me out? Nope, he didn't say nothing. He took a pinch, never uttered a fucking word. And so what? That's illegal because people want to gamble on, spend $5, $10 on a spread that's lopsided to begin with? It's bullshit. It's bullshit. People ought to be able to gamble. Look, they gambled in fucking Roman times, for Christ's sakes. Hello? Like, what's the harm? Yeah, if your babies aren't eating and your wife doesn't got money and you're spending your fucking welfare check on gambling, yeah, then you got a fucking problem. Then somebody's getting hurt. But a guy putting $150 down on the Flyers over the Penguins in Game 6 with a +4 or whatever the fuck, or a -250 or whatever the case may be. Who are you hurting? Go after the fucking companies, not guys like Joey. Gambling, get the fuck out of here. Gambling. One fucking stupid charge. I won $2,000. Ooh, guess what? They pay more than they... Listen, you want to really talk levity here? Bingo halls. Bingo halls. $100 per game. First 10 games. The 10th game of that series, $1,000. So they've already given away X, Y, and Z. They play 20 games at $100. You do the fucking math. What is that, 2,000 or whatever the fuck? Then they give 1,500. They're giving away, and then you're talking about the fucking instance. And then the door prizes. They're giving away $5,000 to $10,000 a fucking thing. But you know why bingo halls are legitimate? Because they hire cops to watch the fucking door, and they have to give a percentage to charity. Joey, got a great fucking argument for you for Judge Sullivan. Tell him you won the $2,000, right? And you donated 12% to this, 5% to this. This is what I owe for tax. We should be good to go. That's what I would fucking do. What do you got to lose? But listen, in all seriousness, and then I'm going to see, we're already over an hour, and I haven't even gotten to the hub of the show yet. Here's the point I want to make, is that gambling's bullshit. It's gambling. It's a bullshit charge, and I want to move on from that for a second. But I wanted to say something about plea deals, because people are once again getting confused on what I've said about this. Listen, anybody that takes a plea's got to take a plea for a reason. I don't fault anybody who does. Who the fuck wants to go to prison? That doesn't make you guilty. Sometimes guys plead out to shit they don't do because the options, when you go into federal court, I don't give a fuck what court you go into. The odds are stacked against you. It used to be innocent until proven guilty. But I hate to tell you this, but it's really guilty until proven innocent. Especially when it comes to the federal government. Because they stack the deck on top of you. I sat at Joey Merlino's trial, and I swear to God, if I could tell you one convincing thing that I heard that made Joey guilty, I would tell you. I'm not gonna... my loyalty is not fucking blind. I couldn't believe sitting there listening to this fucking rat Rubio and fucking Frankenstein. What the fuck was his name? What the fuck was that? Wayne Kreisberg. It's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous to the lengths that people will go. And guess what? Anybody that tells me they'd rather take a 30-year fucking deal in prison versus 2 years for gambling come on. So for anybody that's trying to distort those words, because people have, that's not what I meant. What anybody does that I consider a friend, I support. I said that 100 times. Where did that get lost in the fucking translation? All right. So all that being said, those are all the questions that we got. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to Vincent Gigante. Stay tuned. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are talking about Vincent the Chin Gigante. Vincent the Chin Gigante was born March 29th, 1928 in New York City. He was born on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. His parents were first-generation immigrants from Naples, Italy, and actually never learned the English language. Vincent and his family and relatives all settled in New York City, along with some in Westchester County, including Connecticut and Massachusetts. Vincent the Chin Gigante got his nickname really from the way his mother would pronounce his given name, which is Vincenzo, and Chen would be the way that she would do it because there were so many Vincenzos in the neighborhood. She would just go Chin, and that's essentially how he got that nickname. He had four brothers: Mario, Pasquale, Ralph, who all pretty much followed the same sort of lifestyle into organized crime. The only brother that didn't was Louis Gigante, who actually became a Roman Catholic priest at a church, a Roman Catholic church in the South Bronx, and ultimately become a city councilman. Gigante graduated from Public School 3 in the West Village in Manhattan, later attended Textile High School. At around the age of 16, about ninth grade, he ended up dropping out to pursue a career as a professional boxer, and he worked a number of blue-collar occupations, which one included, I believe, sort of being a guy that made suits. And also as a teenager, Gigante got to start with Vito Genovese and Philip Lombardo. Those were the two guys that sort of brought him into the lifestyle. And between the ages of 17 and 25, he was arrested 7 times in charges ranging from receiving stolen goods, possession of unlicensed handguns, illegal gambling, and bookmaking as well. Most of the allegations that were ever brought against him were dismissed, and the longest sentence he actually served in those days was 60 days for illegal gambling. During that time, he was also semi-employed as a tailor. Vincent Gigante, really, when we talk about his boxing career, it was a very short-lived boxing career, and he was known at the time as the Chin Gigante. He fought 25 matches, lost 4, boxing 117 rounds. On February 19th of 1945, he fought Pete Pitera in Madison Square Garden and won by a knockout in the second round. During his boxing career, he fought in the light heavyweight division. His first professional boxing match was against Vic Chambers on July 18th of 1944 in Union City, New Jersey, which he actually ended up losing. And then he would go on to fight Chambers a second time at the St. Nicholas Arena on June 29th, 1945, and actually defeated him by knocking him out. Then they fought again, I believe, at Madison Square Garden. He also fought at Madison Square Garden against Luther McMillan on March 8th, 1946, which he won. And he fought Buster Pepe on July 19th, 1946, which he lost. His last match was against Jimmy Slade, May 17th, 1947, which he lost at Ridgewood Grove, Brooklyn, New York. During the match, he was really cut really bad over his right eye, which you can tell looking at photos. There's a huge scar over top of his eye, but the cut was so bad that the referee ended up stopping the fight and awarded the win to Slade. And that was the first and only time that Gigante was ever stopped due to an injury. Slade was a top contender, and the fight was pretty nasty until the stoppage. His boxing manager was Tommy Eboli, and his sparring partner was Rocky Castellani, and also as well his sparring partner was Genovese crime family acting boss Dominic Cirillo. Gigante earned his mafia, sort of got his mafia decoder ring, if you want to say it that way, as an enforcer back in the 1950s. He worked with the Greenwich Village crew, which were essentially a group of mobsters in Greenwich Village that were overseen by Vito Genovese and then later Anthony Strollo. Gigante was also a protege of Vito Genovese as well. Genovese really sort of kind of honed who Gigante became towards the probably middle 60s all the way through the 80s. Between 17 and 25, Gigante was arrested a bunch of more times for receiving stolen goods, possession of handguns, and other things. Okay, we have to move to May 2nd, 1957. Vito Genovese ordered Gigante to murder Genovese family boss Frank Costello. There were a lot of reasons for this, but most importantly, Genovese wanted to be in the smack business. Costello didn't want it. Genovese had designs on taking over the family, and Gigante really had a problem. And he ends up going to Carlo Gambino. And the deal that him and Gambino, the way he goes to Gambino is he says, look, at your age, and Albert Anastasia's age, you're probably never going to take over as boss until you're like in your 90s. So why don't we do this? I want to be boss, so you help me get rid of Costello, and I'll kind of get rid of Anastasia, and we'll both get what we want. Gambino really didn't like Genovese, but he also saw it as a means sort of to an end. And so Gambino kind of goes along with it because there's no way that the Genovese was going to get away with it on his own. So what Genovese ends up doing is hiring Gigante to take a shot at Frank Costello. The other issue was Luciano at the time was technically still the boss of the Luciano crime family, and Genovese didn't like him either. Genovese, first of all, called the Appalachian meeting, which created a lot of fucking problems, and that's going to come after the attempted Costello hit. And so basically what ends up happening is Gigante shoots Costello as he enters the lobby at 115 Central Park West, where Costello had an apartment at the Majestic on the corner of 72nd Street in Manhattan. And just as Gigante fires, he says, "This is for you, Frank." And Frank turns and at the last second just moves enough so that the bullet doesn't get dead center, but it grazes the right side of his head. Costello falls to the ground, and Gigante thought that Costello was dead, and he ran. He took off. He botched the hit. Gigante would end up going on the lam for months, shedding some 40 pounds and cutting his hair to avoid being pointed at as the trigger man. However, Costello knew exactly who shot him, and there was also a witness. I think it was the bellman actually witnessed the hit. Eventually, Gigante would end up coming back to New York City with a crew cut 40 pounds later, telling the police, "I heard you looking for me." The trial would begin, and Costello would refuse to identify Gigante as the assassin, which led to Gigante to thank Costello openly in court. Thanks, Frank. But the problem was the doorman at 115 Central Park West did recognize Vincent Gigante. And as the trial begins, he goes on trial for the shooting. His defense team effectively challenged the credibility of the doorman because the changes in Gigante's appearance. The bellman, you got to remember, the bellman's describing somebody 40 to 60 pounds heavier with different hair. And because Gigante was smart enough to realize that if he changed his appearance, it would probably be tough for the bellman to actually say, well, yeah, that's the guy. He ends up getting acquitted in 1958 on charges of attempted murder. Costello would kind of see the writing on the wall. He wasn't going to fight Genovese. Luciano was already deported to Italy at the time. And so Costello just has to say, you know what? I'm going to get this prick later, or I'm going to get Genovese, because he knew Genovese was behind it. I'll deal with Genovese later on. In 1959, Gigante ends up getting convicted with Vito Genovese and heroin trafficking, and he gets sentenced to 7 years in prison. The sentencing judge was swayed by a flood of letters from residents of Greenwich Village in Little Italy attesting that Gigante's good character and all of the charitable work that he had done and all the good things he had done for juveniles. The hope was that the judge would go lightly, and he really didn't. He gave him 7 years. He was paroled after 5 years. Not long afterwards, he would be promoted to soldier, then to captain, running the Greenwich Village crew. Now, the reason why I want to go back to 1959 is because Appalachian happens. And one of the things that Genovese wanted was, first of all, he wanted to be boss of bosses. That's the first thing. The second thing is he wanted to go full tilt to narcotics trade, narcotics trafficking, and that was a big issue. Obviously, we know about the Havana Convention. We've talked about that on this show a lot. We've talked about drug trafficking in general. And one of the more unique things was Vito Genovese is the one who wanted to call Appalachian to a meeting. First of all, there were a bunch of other things that they wanted to sort of discuss. One of the major things was Genovese wanted Luciano thrown to the fucking wolves. He wanted to take over. He wanted to be boss of bosses. And he wanted everyone to recognize him as such. And so when Appalachian happens and everybody gets arrested, the guy that they really fucking blamed for this whole thing was Genovese. And don't forget that Costello never forgot the bullshit that Genovese pulled. Carlo Gambino also realized Genovese was probably reckless, and Genovese at some point would probably try to kill him. And so basically what the agreement was between Luciano, Costello, and Gambino was, at some point we've got to try to get Genovese the fuck out of here. He's a problem, he's trouble, and, you know, Gigante did what he did, but whatever it is, let's get rid of Genovese. And per what I know, I don't know specifically who it was, but between Costello, Gambino, and Luciano, someone tipped off law enforcement. And what had happened was Vito Genovese, I believe it was Texas. I could be completely fucking wrong about that. If it is, somebody will let me know. But he ends up going to a warehouse to pick up a shipment of drugs like a fucking dunce. And the reason why I say that is because I don't understand why a mob boss is going to pick up drugs. And as soon as he gets in and starts sifting through the junk, the cops all come out of the woodwork and he ends up getting a life sentence. And don't forget, the Genovese also took off to Italy for a murder at one point and had been convicted of narcotics trafficking before. So if he takes a pinch, he's done and out of the way. And essentially, Costello gets the last laugh, and as does Luciano, because it's a little bit of revenge for that. And Gambino gets what he wants because now really the guy that could rival him and the guy that was going to be a threat to him, not just profitability and racketeering wise and the rackets and bootlegging and all this other shit that's going on, bootlegging not so much in those days, but really, he was the one guy that I think Gambino knew, worst came to worst, he was going to pick up a gun. And I think Gambino recognized it, and so they all kind of got together, and Vito Genovese ends up going to prison the rest of his life. And I think that there was always malcontent between Gambino and Vincent Gigante, always. I don't think they liked each other. I think if Gambino had it his way, I think Gigante would have been killed. But for whatever reason, that doesn't happen. So Gigante ends up getting paroled after 5 years, and like I said, not long afterwards, he was promoted from soldier to captain, pretty much running the Greenwich Village crew. Gigante's crew is based at the Triangle Social Club at 208 Sullivan Street in Manhattan, also at the Dante Social Club at 81 McDougal Street, and as well at the Panel Social Club at 208 Thompson Street. Gigante also met with gangsters and business associates in his mother's apartment. He was involved in bookmaking, loan sharking, and was immersed in labor racketeering in New York City's construction and garbage hauling industries. He was also the big guy behind the Windows scheme, which had been done before. Obviously, we've talked about other gangsters that had done that before. Tommy Lucchese actually was a guy who sort of invented that scheme, but it was a little different in terms of how it was run. The crew controlled much organized crime throughout Manhattan, and Gigante went on to become one of the most powerful capos in the New York Mafia in the early 70s until his promotion to boss in 1981. Some of the rackets included labor, union control, gambling, loan sharking, truck hijackings, and extortion. Through his brother Mario, who later became a capo of his own crew, the Gigantes maintained a huge influence in the Bronx and Yonkers and Upper Westchester, which today is more of, it's sort of a split. It's an enclave of Genoveses as well as Bonanos, but I think the Genoveses really still control the Bronx and Yonkers and Upper Westchester and even into New Rochelle. Gigante's closest associates at the time were his brother Mario, his son Andrew, his son Vincent, who recently was just arrested, Dominic Alonghi, Venero Mangano, Frank Condo, Dominic DeQuarto, Thomas D'Antonio, Frank Caggiano, Louis Mana, Giuseppe Della Roe, Dominic Cantorino, Dominic Cirillo, Joe Denti, and Joe Sarcanella. In 1969, Gigante was indicted in New Jersey on charges of conspiracy to bribe an entire 5-member Old Tappan police force. And basically what happened was he sort of tongue-in-cheek went around giving 5 cops money to just kind of look the other way. And the way that he would end up explaining it is that it was Christmas presents, that he was very thoughtful of the police and what they were trying to do. And ultimately, he gets charged with conspiracy to bribe police force, and the police immediately begin to surveil him, and other police law enforcement agencies start to look at him. But the accusation ends up getting dropped after Gigante's lawyers presented reports from psychiatrists that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. One of the things Vinny the Chin knew early on was that if he pretended to be crazy, if he pretended to be out of his mind, fucking nuts, that likely most anything he got caught doing he could bypass with his crazy act, which every few years, and I believe the number is something like 28 fucking times in like 20 years, he put himself into a nut ward to just kind of keep the crazy act going, and it would really work for almost 30 years. And one of the unique things, and what I think is incredibly smart about that, is that for a long time he fooled a lot. He fooled a lot of people. He fooled law enforcement completely for a long time, and he fooled his own men. His own men had no fucking clue that he wasn't crazy. Anybody that walks in a bathrobe and pissing themselves looks fucking nuts. Anytime the FBI would knock on his door, they'd find him in the fucking shower wearing a fucking umbrella with a fucking raincoat on. He just did crazy shit to keep people guessing. And I don't know which FBI agent it was, but one of the FBI agents said that they were surveilling him one night, and he comes out of his mother's apartment, and he's got the bathrobe on, he's doing the slurring shit, the drooling shit, but then they notice that underneath the bathrobe there's a $5,000 sharkskin suit on, like a neon blue sharkskin suit. And one of the things that Gigante would do is that he knew cops didn't like to work late at night. So he would go out at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and go over to his Gumata's house. Because he knew that the police just at that point were exhausted and weren't going to just follow him everywhere. And he got away with it for a long time. In 1981, Philip Benny Squint Lombardo pretty much retires due to ill health. With Lombardo's support, Gigante becomes boss of the Genovese crime family. And what Gigante immediately does is he strengthens the family's stronghold in some of New York City's most lucrative rackets, including the New York Coliseum, the Jacob K. Javits Center, which we've talked about that before. That was really Tony Salerno's doing, and that caused a lot of rift with a lot of other crime families because a lot of people wanted a piece of that, but it was Tony Salerno who put that together, and that was a multi-$100 million business deal. Gigante also got into labor racketeering, the drywall business. Obviously, he started the Concrete Club, which all the crime families shared a percentage of, although I believe to this day that probably the likelihood is Genovese got the higher end of that deal. He also ran the Fulton Fish Market. He ran drug trafficking, private waste industry, gambling, and he controlled the House Wreckers Union, Local 95, the labor unions. When you control a union, and we've talked about this 100 times, when you control a union, especially the House Wreckers Union, that is a huge fucking moneymaker, massive moneymaker. Just the Jacob K. Javits Center alone was a $100 million project. The Concrete Club, $300 million project. This is a guy that understood how to control unions, how to control concrete, and how the concrete worked is all the crime families get a percentage of it. They can determine the price of concrete. The old saying was, Sammy Gravano once said about the construction business, if this guy wanted a building built, who do you think he bought his concrete from? It's the same sort of thing that Nicky Scarfo and Philip Leonetti did in Atlantic City. The difference is this was on a much bigger fucking scale. In June of 1984, Local 95 union officials, President Joseph Sherman, business manager Stephen McNair, and Secretary-Treasurer John Roshtecki were convicted of labor racketeering in connection with extortion from a contractor, which was the Schiavone Chase Corporation. And once again, you don't see Gigante get in any trouble for this. It's union officials took the pinch, but yet it was business as usual, and the construction business kept going. It didn't matter whether a union official got pinched or not. The construction was going to turn over, and they were going to keep making money. He would end up making Anthony Fat Tony Salerno the boss, the front boss of the Genovese family. Since Genovese's death in 1969, the family pretty much had appointed a bunch of front bosses to full law enforcement and protect the real boss. It was ingenuity at the time, and you see a lot of that today. There's a lot of front boss situations going on. The Bananos do it, the Gambinos do it, Genoveses do it. For the most part, I think everybody knows who's really running things, but unless you're 100% certifiably correct on that, you really can't indict somebody. And so Gigante was really responsible for using a front boss system. I'm sure other people did prior to him, but he was the one that was really, really good at it. However, here's what's really, really, really interesting about Tony Salerno being the front boss. It obviously fooled law enforcement. It was an open secret amongst New York gangsters that Gigante was actually the real boss. Everybody sort of knew that Fat Tony Salerno was just the front boss. He was the guy the window dressing, essentially. When new members were inducted to other families, they were certifiably told that Vincent Gigante was the boss of the Genovese crime family. And in 1986, Salerno ends up getting convicted in the commission case on charges of murder and racketeering and sentenced to 100 years of prison, along with top members of the other 5 families in what was called, obviously, the Mafia Commission trial. However, the real truth is that the FBI knew, or at least found out when they sat down with rats and informants, they ultimately would end up finding out that Tony Salerno was not the boss of the crime family at the time. They actually found out that they got it wrong. They found out that Gigante was the boss and Salerno, in fact, was essentially going to get convicted of being boss, even when he wasn't, but they didn't bother to acknowledge it in court. And that's what sort of makes what happened to him a real fucking shame. because they did the same thing to Carmine Persico. Vincent Cafaro would tell the FBI that Salerno really wasn't the boss, and he would tell them that repeatedly. The FBI also had wiretaps which caught members talking about Gigante ordering murders, that he was the boss. So here they are indicting Tony Salerno, full well knowing via Vincent the Fish Cafaro, who's a rat, that Salerno wasn't the boss. But the fact that they were able to just get somebody was good enough for them. And it doesn't make it right because he's directly being charged with murders and racketeering in the head of a crime family when he isn't. That's what I mean to say when I have said repeatedly, and I repeatedly, that the FBI is completely fucking shameful and they're fucking dirty. They did that shit to Carmine Persico, and it's just not right. Now, I know people are going to come at me and say, well, Carmine's a little different. He is, but he isn't. They also had wiretaps between Matty Ianello, who was going over a list of prospective guys that were going to be made in other mob families with Tony Salerno. He's talking to Tony Salerno, and they're going over all these names of guys that are going to be inducted to other families. And Salerno literally says in the wiretap, I don't know who any of these people. I'll leave this up to our boss. So on a wiretap, Salerno is even saying he's not the boss of a crime family. They've got testimony from rats, or at least, I don't want to say confessions, that's a bad fucking word, but information from rats that he's not the boss. So how can you objectively try him in that commission case? It's sort of bullshit. Because let's be realistic. Salerno was a moneymaker. Salerno was probably the biggest earner I've ever seen in my life in that thing. Now, I know Michael the Rat Francaise likes to say a lot of different shit, but that's not true. The truth is that Tony Salerno really was the fucking man, money-wise. Nobody. He's like in the top 3 criminals ever for how much money earnings-wise that they brought in. Billions. We're not talking like $10 million. Billions of fucking dollars. And then, because of a result of this, Salerno ends up going away for life. The thing is that, you know what, you got to look at a guy like Tony Salerno, who could have just absolutely thrown his fucking hands up and said, fuck this shit, I didn't do it. And he could have opened his mouth and buried everybody, but he didn't. He took a pinch for this thing. And when I say this thing, I'm talking about the mob. They don't make guys like that anymore. And it's like a conversation that I had earlier tonight. You know, if everybody decides they're going to go bowling, right, and something bad happens, well, they're all involved. You can't just pick and choose when you're not involved in something. If we all agree that we're going to go rob a bank and one guy murders a fucking guy, we're all fucking culpable because we all go there to do stupid shit. And so that's why, you know, I don't understand the motivation of rats. You get in the car to rob a bank, you're just as guilty as the guy that goes in the bank, even if you sit out in the car jerking your dick while they're fucking doing it. But Tony Salerno doesn't say shit. So once Tony Salerno goes away to prison, Gigante would really leave the front boss position vacant till about 1992. And then what he does is he adds 2 new positions to the family administration. He adds a messenger, and then he adds a street boss. The job of the messenger, who was Dominic Cirillo, was pretty much to take whatever Gigante had to say, whatever orders he had, take them to our family members, take them to other family members, and your job is to sort of act as a liaison between the different crime families. He just did not want any direct contact with anybody else. Anything that needed to be said went from him to one guy, and that was it. And a lot of that was to make sure that, the old saying, loose lips sink ships. If I'm only telling one guy and people are finding this shit out, then I know directly who I need to go after. The street boss, Laborio Bellomo, pretty much was the operating head of the family's rackets under Gigante, under his remote supervision, because Gigante tried to stay off the streets as much as possible. Obviously, there's, you know, video and photos of him coming in and out of his social club and stuff like that. But for the most part, Barney Bellomo took over as street boss, turned a lot of rackets around, made a lot of money for them. But both positions were created to really just insulate Gigante from the associates. What he really didn't want was a boss associating with associates. It needed to be boss to underboss, or boss to messenger to underboss to consigliere. And then, you know, there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of interaction between Gigante and Capos whatsoever. He had a system, and it worked for 30 fucking years. Gigante also was really reclusive. He managed never to be picked up on a wiretap by the FBI or other law enforcement agencies. And he was able to remain on the streets longer than pretty much everybody else that he grew up around. He really was untouchable for a long time. And you kind of got to marvel at his ability to outthink law enforcement. A lot of these guys today don't. However, the fact that he barely left his house unaccompanied because he knew FBI agents would sneak into his house and plant a bug. And so he always managed to keep people around the house and nobody was able to get in. And the other thing that was really interesting was he wasn't picked up on a wiretap, but the one thing that the FBI eventually did catch him doing was talking to his wife, Olympia. He had 2 wives, both were named Olympia. I guess that's a way for him never to forget which name. He's never going to call a broad by the wrong name, but they catch him talking to her, I love you, kiss, 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 and all this shit. So obviously the jig was kind of starting to get up about how crazy he was. Now, look, a lot has been made about the rivalry between John Gotti and Vincent Gigante, but that's more lore and more myth than actual truth itself. I've talked a lot about that, and I'm going to get sort of back to that in a second, but I wanted to sort of move on to something else. Gigante ends up promoting Benny Eggs Mangano to his underboss and sends orders directly through his closest associates, which continued to insulate him from the other family's bosses and lower-ranking wise guys. He just didn't want to communicate with anybody. It's the old adage: if you don't say anything to anybody, nobody can say anything to law enforcement about you. And it was a smart way to be. When it was necessary to speak to other mobsters, he only whispered so he could barely be heard. Was never really picked up on a wiretap, and he never ever discussed criminal business on the telephone. But like I said, he was repeatedly caught talking to his wife, kissy face, and all that shit. He had a rule. Anybody who mentioned his name would be killed on the spot, and any mobster from any other family who mentioned his name would be probably killed. His men, when they had to discuss him, either pointed to their chin or made a C with their thumb and forefinger. Gigante would not hesitate to authorize the use of violence and was responsible for ordering the murders of Philadelphia crime family mobsters Antonio Caponegro, Fred Salerno, and Frank Sindone for the unsanctioned 1980 hit of mob boss Angelo Bruno, and Philadelphia mobsters Frank Narducci, Rocco Marinucci for the unsanctioned murder of Philip Testa, who was Bruno's successor. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people don't know this, but Gigante was behind the hit of Angelo Bruno. First of all, John Stanfield was very close to Vincent Gigante, and if anybody thinks that John Stanfield wasn't in on that, they're out of their fucking minds. He was. Nicky Scarfo had eyes on wanting to be the boss, but he didn't want to step in front of Philip Testa. And it was easier for Nicky Scarfo to just kind of sit back and wait, because as soon as and this isn't the first time that Gigante kind of pulled this kind of fucking move either. He had a vested interest in maybe not seeing Angelo Bruno killed, but there was money to be made. And there were that whole entire issue that Angelo Bruno had with Atlantic City and his own men and drugs and everything. That was a big, big fucking issue. And I think that Gigante, I think he realized Philadelphia needed a change. And really, this kind of goes back to Christy Tick and his issue with, Antonio Caponegro. Caponegro thought that he had permission. Him and Christy Tick had a huge, long-running beef over some New Jersey rackets. And Caponegro was basically lied to and said that he had permission to go ahead and do it. He went and did it. The next thing he knows, he's summoned in front of Vincent the Chin Gigante, who obviously is going to have him killed. Because Christy Tick just absolutely lies and denies it and says, I don't know anything about this. I never authorized this. He acted on his own. And so what does Genovese do? Orders the death. Not Genovese, Gigante. So I've always thought that Gigante sort of had a hand in that. Obviously, anybody that says, no, he would have never, well, come on. He tried to kill Costello. That was against the rules. And that directly is going to go to a Gotti argument, which, everybody has said through lore and myth that Gigante wanted Gotti dead because of what Gotti did to Castellano. Bullshit. Fucking Gigante tried to do the same fucking thing to Costello, which is an unsanctioned fucking hit. So the idea that, Gigante would thumb his nose at Gotti for doing what he did versus what he did, it's just bullshit. You just have to use logic. And Gigante wasn't the type of guy that was going to have it one way for him and different for everybody else. That's not the kind of guy that he fucking was. Gigante also ordered the murders of Genovese soldier Gerald Papa and many others. Gigante worked silently with other families, usually via partners. He had a very close relationship with Paul Castellano, which I think ultimately is what bothered him about what Gotti did, because him and Castellano had a lot of business ties together. However, it's worth mentioning that nobody mentions, that I'm going to mention now, under Gotti, the Gambinos were more profitable than under Castellano, and that's the truth. And Gigante made more money with Gotti as boss than he ever did with Castellano. It worked out financially. One of his partners was Angelo the Hook LaPietra, the boss of Chicago until his death in March of 99. Gigante was also able to control the flow of other mob families. It's no secret that he wanted Nicodemo Scarfo as boss of Philadelphia, was complicit in the death of Angelo Bruno, which we already mentioned. He once threatened Vicamuso during a wake that if he didn't back off the window contracts, that Vicamuso would not leave the wake alive. Amuso backed off, and that's how much power Gigante had. In 1969, Gigante started feigning mental illness to escape criminal prosecutions. He would end up escaping conviction on bribery charges by producing a number of prominent psychiatrists who would testify that he was legally insane. The doctors would say that Gigante had schizophrenia, dementia, psychosis, and other disorders. Gigante then enlisted his mother and his wife to help him out with the deceptions. The government had many psychiatrists examine Vinny, including Thomas Guthrill from Harvard University, Donald Klein from Columbia, William Reed from the University of Texas, Wilfred Van Gorp from Cornell, and Stanley Portnow from NYU, and Abraham Halpern from New York Medical College. These psychiatrists all said that Gigante was not competent to stand trial nor to be sentenced. Even not when he was under indictment, he prepared for inevitable charges, knowing the FBI was always watching him. Almost every day he would return from his residence to his mother's apartment at 225 on Sullivan Street in Greenwich Village and emerged dressed in a bathrobe in pajamas or a windbreaker with shabby trousers. Accompanied by one or two bodyguards, he crossed the street to the Triangle Civic Improvement Association, a dingy storefront club that he used as his social club. He would go in there and play pinochle and would have conversations and send messages the way he needed to. Regular visitors to the Triangle Club at that time was obviously Barney Belomo, John Ardito, Tino Fumara, Ernest Muscarella, and Danny Leo. And from Gigante's 1990 indictment, and after all his incarcerations in La Tuna, these guys are the guys who effectively ran the crime family while Gigante was in prison. In 1990, Gigante was arrested and charged with racketeering and murder. In 1997, he was brought to trial. During that time period, Gigante's lawyer produced witness after witness who testified that Gigante was absolutely fucking crazy and was unfit to stand trial. The delays actually allowed Gigante's legal team to use the Windows racket case as a preview for the government's case against Gigante, so it absolutely helped them. The gambit backfired, however, when 4 high-ranking members of other families began to cooperate with the government in the early 90s. One of those was Sammy the Bull Gravano, former underboss of the Gambino crime family, and Philip, the piece of shit Leonetti, former underboss of the Philadelphia Mafia, would actually become cooperating witnesses in 1991. Gravano and Leonetti would testify, however, and Gravano would testify that he met Gigante twice, and on both occasions, Gigante was perfectly lucid and clear in his thinking and made good decisions. His testimony was backed up, obviously, by Lucchese family acting boss Alphonse Little Al Diarco and also Philip Leonetti. The 3 witnesses all argued that Gigante would have never been recognized as boss if other families believed he was absolutely fucking nuts. Leonetti also implicated Gigante in ordering the murder of several Bruno family members in the 1980s. In 1993, Anthony Gaspipe Casso, former underboss of the Lucchese crime family, implicated Gigante in a 1986 plan to have Casso kill new Gambino boss John Gotti. underboss Frank DeCicco and Gotti's brother Gene Gotti due to the unsanctioned 1985 murder of John Gotti's former boss Paul Castellano. But like I said earlier, that's a bull-faced fucking lie. It's not true. Casso was lying because, in fact, Casso had a beef with Angelo Ruggiero, who went back a long way. Angelo Ruggiero and Casso had a dispute over a lot of different things, some business stuff, some property stuff, and effectively Ruggiero tries to get rid of Casso ahead of time, and he ends up trying to kill him using Billy Heidel. And when obviously Jimmy Heidel is picked up by Casso, who tortures and kills him, obviously Heidel gives up the name of Angelo Ruggiero. And unfortunately, the mistake that Ruggiero made was the hit on Casso didn't go well. Casso survived. And at that point, Casso was absolutely determined to get even with somebody. And what he does is he's the one that sets the bomb up to kill Frankie DeCicco. And it had nothing to do with Vincent Gigante whatsoever. Casso fully lied when he said that he and Vic Amuso got the contract from Gigante, and then through Lucchese boss at the time, Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo. It's absolutely not true. It's unsubstantiated, and it's been lore that has just absolutely been spun a million different ways. The truth is that not long after Paul Castellano was killed, Vincent Gigante and Gotti sat down and they ironed out a lot of stuff as far as rackets and some of the garment district stuff and a lot of construction, and it was mutually beneficial for both. John Gotti gets what he wants, and Gigante gets a bigger kick of the action, which is what he truly wanted. And one of the things that Vincent the Chin Gigante wanted in return was he wanted Angelo Ruggiero dead for what happened to Casso. It wasn't about Castellano, it was about Casso. Gotti absolutely refuses to do it. Because in Gotti's estimation, shelving Angelo Ruggiero was a lot more damaging to him than killing him. And it would turn out to be right, as Angelo Ruggiero sadly died of cancer not long after all of that happened. So the truth that Vincent the Chin set this all up is just absolute bullshit. This is delusions from Gaspipe Casso, who's had a really hard time telling the truth really about anything. And so that's the honest truth. Why people keep spinning it a different way. And I'm going to make one argument, and I've made this argument before. The people that keep saying John Gotti brought down the whole fucking mob, John Gotti killed the boss without permission. First of all, Frankie DeCicco went out and got permission from everybody. He sent feelers out to talk to everybody, and everybody was in on it. Chin was off the fucking record, but he was fine. Go ahead and do it. So they were all in on it. That's the first thing. The second thing is Sammy the Bull Gravano is the one that fucking testified. John Gotti didn't testify against anybody. So Philip Leonetti, little Al Diarco, and all these other scumbags are the ones that brought down the mob. It's not single-handedly John Gotti's fucking fault. Should he have been a little quieter? Absolutely. You're not going to hear me say anything different than that. That's the truth. He should have shut his mouth a little more. That's the truth. But there's been this narrative that's been spun a million different ways that just really isn't. It's just not accurate. The second point I want to make is that Gigante tried to kill Costello. That's against the fucking rules. Okay? Let's see. Carlo Gambino orders the death of Albert Anastasia, who was a boss. Joe Masseria. I mean, do we need to keep going here? Lucky Luciano killed how many fucking bosses? So you can't tell me, and this has always been my argument, you can't tell me the rule it applies, it's okay for Luciano, it's okay for fucking Anastasia, or for Gambino, it's okay for Genovese, it's okay for Gigante, but it's not okay for John Gotti? What's the fucking difference? What is the difference? And I don't understand how people can draw that parallel and argue anything different with me. The point is that if it's been this way since the institution of La Cosa Nostra, then it is what it is. Then it is what it is. Bosses come, bosses go. You can't say, oh, well, that was the old days. Bullshit. Bullshit. That's a shitty argument. That's a shitty argument. Shitty argument. Anyway, in June of 1993, largely based on the basis of these informants' testimony, prosecutors won a superseding indictment that charged Gigante with helping orchestrate the Windows racket for Genevieve's boss and ordering numerous murders. At a sanity hearing in the spring of 96, Savino, Gravano, D'Arco, and Leonetti all testified that it was common knowledge that Gigante's insanity was a fucking joke. Federal prosecutors from Brooklyn backed up this testimony with rebuttal opinions from other shrinks. A judge sided with the prosecution and ruled that Gigante absolutely was competent to stand trial. On July 25th of 1997, Gigante was convicted on 8 counts of racketeering and conspiracy charges. Despite his lawyers' and psychiatrists' claims that he had been legally insane for more than 30 years, the jury convicted him on all but the murder charges, which carried a sentence of life imprisonment without parole. In December of 97, he ends up getting sentenced to 12 years in a federal prison by Judge Jack Weinstein, who declared that Gigante had been brought to bay in his declining years after decades of vicious criminal tyranny. While in prison, he was still in control of the Genovese crime family, and while other mobsters were entrusted to run the day-to-day activities of the family, Gigante ultimately relayed orders and had the final say on all mob business, and he used his son Andrew, who would visit him in prison, to carry out his messages. In 2002, Gigante gets indicted on charges of racketeering and obstruction of justice. Federal prosecutors in Brooklyn alleged that Gigante continued to rule the Genovese crime family from prison and also accused him of causing a 7-year delay in his previous trial because he was bullshitting this insanity defense. Also indicted was his son Andrew, who was accused of delivering messages to Gigante to family leaders. Prosecution also obtained evidence that Gigante had listed his wife, his mistress, and several of his children and his brother in a scheme to feign insanity. Faced with this evidence on April 7, 2003, the day that trial was due to start, Gigante pleaded guilty to obstructing justice. The FBI would threaten Gigante at that point if he didn't stop this bullshit crazy act, then they absolutely would arrest and indict his entire family, his children, his mistresses, anybody remotely connected to him. And then he just figured at that point, the jig is fucking up. It's done. I don't want my kids going to prison. And he does what he was always against. He never agreed to pleas. He then admits to intentionally delaying his previous racketeering trial and misleading numerous psychiatrists over 30 years about his mental state. As part of the plea deal, prosecutors dropped the racketeering charges that would have brought a lengthy trial and assured that he would die in prison if convicted. He was 75 at the time of the trial. Instead, they only added 3 more years to his sentence, so he ended up with 15 years in prison. The New York Times organized crime recorder and mob historian Selwyn Rabb described Gigante's plea as an unprecedented capitulation by a mafia boss. It was almost unheard of for a boss to even consider pleading guilty. Gigante only agreed to the deal to ease the burden on his relatives. His son Andrew potentially faced 20 years in prison, but got 2 years and a $2 million fine. Another provision of the plea agreement stipulated that any relatives who had helped in his deception, including his wife, mistress, and Father Lewis, would not be charged with any crime. In 2005, Gigante's health begins to start to decline. He experienced chest pains, had problems breathing. His lower body would swell, and he would have bouts of unconsciousness. And he ended up getting moved from FCI Fort Worth to Springfield, Missouri. And then in November of 2005, his lawyer sued officials at the medical center for the federal prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, to transfer him to an acute care hospital. The reason why is because they weren't taking care of him. Anybody that's ever been to prison should know that if you have a serious medical condition, it's not often really give a fuck about. Especially if you're an upper echelon mobster, they just don't fucking care. And usually lawyers have to get involved and threaten to sue the prison before they actually transfer you to a place where you can actually get some sort of help. And that's what happened to Gigante. He ends up getting transferred to a pretty good medical facility, and he starts to get better physically. But then come December, they ended up transferring him back to Springfield, where he would end up dying 10 days later on December 19th of 2005. Had he not died, he probably likely would have walked out of prison. According to a 2011 report by Jerry Capisci, Gigante's relatives would earn nearly $2 million a year as gainful employees of the companies of the New Jersey waterfront, which still takes place today. In 1969, Gigante had been treated And this is going back to his psych stuff. 20 separate occasions for psych disorders at St. Vincent's in Harrison, New York. All visitations coincided with news of criminal indictments being handed down against him. So every time he got indicted, he would run off to the shrink and say he was crazy. And that would actually be the thing that he would use. Psychologists and mental health workers said at the time of trial, from 1969 to 1995, he had been confirmed 30 times in hospitals for treatment of hallucinations, that he had dementia-rooted and organic brain damage. He had open heart surgery in 98 and another cardiac operation in 96 before his racketeering trial. And according to court transcripts, he was prescribed to take 5 milligrams of Valium, 100 milligrams of Thorazine, and 30 milligrams of Dalmane. First of all, Thorazine is what they put serial killers on, so that's kind of intriguing. And that's sort of the life of Vincent Gigante. He was street savvy. He was smart. He was able to fucking earn. And one of the unique things that a lot of people make fun of the whole, he's crazy thing, but it worked for 30 years. He had an incredible run as boss. Most guys don't get a run like he did. And in the end, the government won. The government usually does win, and he ends up taking a plea. And he would have gotten out had he not gotten sick. But I think that looking back on his life, he was treacherous, he was dangerous, but there's so much lore and so much myth that's been distorted over the years about who he was and how he made decisions, especially with the Gotti thing. And I'm not by any means saying that Gotti was some super genius that did everything right and he was a folk hero and all of this shit. I'm not saying any of that. I just think that reality is that book authors want to write it the way they want because they believe in this lore and this myth that the rules are always followed and that there's some sort of a moral ambiguity when it comes to how things work. Look, they're criminals. You kill. It's kill or be killed. It's whoever can make the most money. And so this fantasy, I think, is often started by authors who watch The Godfather too many fucking times. The Godfather's not an accurate fucking movie by any stretch of the fucking imagination. And why that has sort of become sort of the backstory for a lot of mob writers is just beyond my understanding. If you've never been around a mob guy or never been around mob people, it's a crazy lifestyle. It's a crazy world. There's a lot of tragedy. There's a lot of murder and a lot of mayhem. And I think that, and I'm going to say this about mob kids for a second because I think this needs to be said. I think a lot of people always assume that mob kids are entitled and that, they live some sort of fairy tale life existence. And it's not really true. Yeah, their fathers are murderers. Their fathers make a lot of money. But that's not a substitute for a father rotting away in a cell. I have a friend of mine whose father, she spent 2 years of her life with her father, and the rest he's been in prison. And that's the reality. You think money's going to buy like that type of shit? And that's the thing. I think mob kids, first of all, you have to be able to do two things here. You have to be able to separate the man from the father. The guy who's in the streets bouncing, killing people, doing what he's got to do, that's one guy on the streets. The guy at home is not the same guy. And what I think is paramount is that you see typically, and maybe I don't really necessarily want to talk about Karen Gravano, but I think that she's somebody who would have had a lot of levity in what she said, as far as the way that she sort of lived. But she plays this mob princess shit to the hilt. I don't feel bad for her 1 minute. Then she gets caught drug dealing and all this other shit, and her father's a rat. She can't take that, I just think from that perspective, that's a little different than, say, somebody who, like Carmine Persico's granddaughter, for instance. He never spent time with her grandfather, never met him. Her father and this and that and the third. I think that what people don't talk about is how the kids suffer. I'm not saying it's justified. I'm not saying, people should cut them slack because of what their fathers did, but they're not their fathers. But I also am going to say that what child isn't going to defend their father? Just because they do what they do doesn't mean they love their father any less. but they're going to defend their father. And I think that what happens socially, especially on social media, is people want to dog this person, people want to dog that person. And it's like, if you said that about my father, I'd want to beat your ass and kill you too. I'd defend him at all costs, even if he did these horrible, atrocious things. He's still my father. So I think that there's a big misunderstanding that the way people in the media and people on social media sort of look at that. And it's sort of fucked up. It's almost like, they're punishing the kids for the sins of the father, and that's not right. It's not like they had a choice in what their father did. He made a choice, and he's going to pay for his crimes and all of that kind of shit. But I just think, I don't know, I just think that nobody thinks about that. They always think that, a gangster is some jet flying, silk suit wearing, got the money, banging all the broads, everybody's scared of him kind of shit. But in reality, they go home and got to put their pants on and deal with the same family bullshit we all deal with. The only difference is what they do for a living. And I think that there's this myth and there's this, people sort of create, like I said, The Godfather. That's the best example I can use for it. People act like these guys are like fucking NFL players, and I can't tell you, and I'm going to say this and then I'm going to shut up, is that a lot of people will fucking message me and say, oh, I'm thinking of writing this person in prison and writing this person in prison. Do you think that's safe? Why the fuck do you want to write somebody you've never known? And you're going to write to them about the mafia? Like, I don't understand it. Now, I've written a lot of guys, but that's different. I come from a background a lot of people don't fucking know about. Some do, most do, but they don't know the specifics. There are people that know my background, like, very specifically, and they get it. I come from a fucking, I don't even know the pedigree. I come from a fucking pedigree. And so me writing to somebody is a lot different than somebody that lives in fucking Arkansas writing somebody. It's the same type of people that write serial killers. Like, I don't get it. Is it something that you need so badly for somebody to know your name? It doesn't make you special. And trust me, you're going to get more than you bargain with some of these guys. Anthony Center being one of them, a fucking nutcase. But Anthony's Anthony, and so when people tell me that, I got a message from somebody last week. Maybe it was a lot longer than that. I think it was a month ago. And she says to me, I wrote to this person. Do you know this person? Yeah, I know of this person. I don't know this person specifically, but I know somebody that knows this person very well. And she said that she was writing this person and things were normal. And then it took like this fucking romantic thing. And the next thing you know, she gives out her phone number. Then this guy's calling nonstop. She gets a little rattled because the guy that she's talking to killed a lot of fucking people. A lot of fucking people. I'll just tell you, it was Tommy Pitera is the person she wrote. And she comes to me and says, how do I get out of this? I said, what the fuck did you write to him for? Like, what do you have in common with Tommy Pitera? What the fuck could you possibly, you can't ask him about the street life because he's not going to talk about that. So what is it that you're hoping? Somebody I know very well, who I think I know very well, he can tell me if I'm wrong, says to me all the time, people are fucking nuts. These people are psychos. And so from that perspective, the only thing I can tell the people that keep messaging me that they want to write to people is you got to ask yourself why you want to do that to begin with. B, what's the fucking goal? They're not going to talk to you about crimes. They're not going to talk to you about the life. So really, what are you hoping to achieve? And that's the thing. And so for the girl that wrote me that had the problem with Tommy is that, what did you expect? You're not dealing with fucking Mr. Rogers. You're not dealing with like Tom Hanks or fucking John Travolta. You're not dealing with fucking, well, maybe that's not the best example, but you're not dealing with a 9-to-5er here. You're not dealing with a guy that's happy. And so what did you expect? And then he makes some sort of loose weirdo threat, according to you. It just, I don't get it. And I don't really know where this is going, to be honest with you. I think just people need to think twice before they, okay, I know where I was going. Sorry about that. People need to think twice. Everybody's an internet gangster. Everybody knows somebody. But the reality is that 90% of you don't. You want to stand behind people that you think are tough, that aren't anybody. Everybody knows somebody. Oh, I knew this guy back in 1982. What the fuck? 1982, what the fuck's that got to do with 2018? So the point is that if you're a fan of this genre, be a fan of the genre. Love the history of it. But don't get intermingled with people. You have no idea. You think this is like The Godfather, where the guy's going to walk in and he's going to mutter stupid shit to you and he's going to make you feel tough. And if you have a problem, he's going to give a fuck. Reality is, and I'm telling you, they're not going to give a fuck about your problems. They got their own. They've got their own problems. This is not fucking The Godfather. These are people that are serious fucking people. I'm saying serious fucking people. And you think, oh, well, I read about his past and he's really cool. And like, so at what point do you think, like Tommy Pitera, for an example, who chopped somebody's fucking head off and put it in a fucking fridge, at what point do you think that's a good idea? I mean, reality. You know? What, are you going to share cooking recipes with Jeffrey fucking Dahmer? Ted, you're going to compare nipples with Ted Bundy? Are you going to fucking... fuck, I don't know. I could rattle off a million serial killers. John Wayne Gacy, you gonna compare clown makeup with him? Dear John, what color fucking makeup do you wear on the third Tuesday of February? And should it be blood red or offset red? Because I don't want it to conflict with my fucking dress. I mean, let's be realistic here. A lot of you people, and I say this because it's not just one, there's a whole bunch of you. You don't know what you're getting involved in. You don't know who you're talking to. You certainly don't know who you're fucking mouthing off to half the time. Because everybody knows somebody. That's the truth. Everybody knows somebody. But the point I'm trying to cut home is that for people that are fans of the genre, be smart. Don't get yourself into nothing stupid. Don't think that you're fucking going to write somebody. You're going to have some fairy tale fucking romance. Or you're going to get some kind of like special relationship with somebody doing life. They got nothing better to do than to write you. What else are they going to do? And so think about what you're doing. Think about it. It's not about being tough. And people can say whatever they want about me. I know a lot of different people. And I think that I'm on the record with a lot of the people I know. But knowing them doesn't make me tough. Because there's times when I fucking get a little weirded out by some people. Because every once in a while you're going to run across a guy that looks at you and he looks right fucking through you. He don't even see you. He looks right through you, to the wall, to wherever. And so there's some scary guys. I'm not going to lie. There's some tough, scary fucking guys. So do yourself a favor. Don't get involved in the nonsense. And for anybody that wants to bark and say, oh, I know this guy and you're a piece of shit and this, people will always say crazy shit to me. The thing is, they never say it to me. They say it on the internet. They're not going to say it to me. You know, the dog, the lion never turns his back when the small dog barks. And there's a lot of truth to that. It's not about being tough. At the end of the day, what this is all about is stay the fuck away from this shit. There's no reason, if you don't know shit from Cheyenne, stay the fuck away from it. You got no business being involved with it. You know, the tough guys that say, oh, I'm a gangster and this and that. Get the fuck out of here. You wouldn't know a fucking French fry versus a gangster if you ever saw one. And that's true. And that's the truth. Just live your life and have fun. You ain't need to get involved in no crazy shit. Leave the crazy shit to me. And so there's one last thing I wanted to address, sort of, before I cut out of here. Because it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm fucking tired. You know, there's a bunch of psychopaths that keep fucking messaging me, and I don't know what they're trying to prove, and I really could give a fuck less. I don't need to defend myself because at the end of the day, these people are nothing. They sit behind a wall, they run their fucking mouths, and they make threats. And doesn't anybody make a threat to somebody's face? They want to steal your photos and put them online and say shit and do shit. But I got news for you, and I'm going to say this on the air, and I guarantee you my attorneys are going to go, oh my God, what the fuck are you doing this for? But I'm going to say this. I was in a relationship for a long time with somebody, and when I met her, she was getting divorced or whatever, and I raised her daughter from a couple of months old to like 6 years old. She called me dad. And this kid is my kid. I don't care what anybody says. And you ain't gotta like me, right? You cannot like what I do. You cannot like what I stand for. But what you will not do, is you will not go into my page and take a photo of my daughter with me and then make a post with some pedophile reference about daddy-daughter time, and you wonder what I'm doing to her. Because I'm going to tell you the legitimate fact of how I feel about that. And I'm going to say it in a way that you can take it however the fuck you want to take it. And you know who you are, you piece of shit. Fucking rat-loving sack of shit in Florida. Because it's you. And you know who you are. It takes a real fucking deviant bastard to even say something like that. But the fact that you're going to say that about an innocent fucking child, an innocent fucking kid who's done nothing to you, you don't like her father, but you're going to say some vile shit like that to her. You know, there ain't I get upset about a lot of shit, but this is something different. Because this is like, you don't say that about a man's kid. I don't like you. I don't attack your kids. I don't even attack your wife. So all I'm going to say is this. There is going to come a time and a place, my friend, where you and I are going to cross paths. And it's going to be whatever it's going to be. But I guarantee you, and this is the other thing that you're not too bright on. Maybe you didn't get maybe you're stuffing too much coke up your fucking nose that you didn't get this fucking memo. You know, there's a lot of people on fucking social media that particularly pay attention to the shit you say. Could be uncles, could be relatives, could be people that look at that child as their granddaughter, their niece. And yet, you decided that would be a good thing to do. And so I'm going to say as a fucking father that if I ever fucking come across you, it's going to be something. Because I'm not going to tolerate that. You can hang out with the rat and hope the FBI is going to fucking protect your ass. Because that's exactly what this is. You sit and you chirp from fucking 1,500 miles away because you know you're friends with a guy who's on the FBI payroll. And he'll protect you. It's a scumbag fucking thing to do. And you're a fucking degenerate fucking jerk off nothing. You're a fucking nothing. And you just ain't going to talk about my daughter that way. And you can sit there and deny it. But I got the screenshots. And you can play your little fucking game all you fucking want because you're a fucking scumbag and a jerk off. But I'm telling you, and I'm being honest, you know, that there's going to come a time. It's going too far. And you're going to get what's coming to you. That's the bottom line. So with that, that's this week's show. We'll be back next week. We'll do another Q&A with a bunch of other stuff. I apologize for dragging on and on, but you know, the amount of sickness that's out there is just, it's ridiculous. And, you know, people that say shit like that, they get what's coming to them. Believe me, they do. And, guy's a fucking just vile piece of shit. And I don't want to keep going because I'm just going to say stupid shit and it's just going to create havoc for me. But, you know, it is what it is. So thanks for tuning in. We'll catch everybody next week. Follow me on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Check us out on YouTube at Mob Talk Radio. Over on Facebook, Mob Talk Radio. You can send me direct messages. I'll answer anything you want. I am not going to talk about what I just mentioned, with the exception of few limitations. I will tell some people who it is. But as far as that goes, I'm not going to say it publicly just because, you know, the old saying that mention names, places, dates, and things has a way of getting you in trouble somewhere down the line. So I'm not going to do that. So have a great week. And thanks for tuning in as usual. Send your threats, compliments, and complaints to the usual places. reach out and say hello. I talked to many of you online, and I wanted to say to my buddy Daryl that keep your head up, buddy. You're going to be all right. Daryl's a friend of mine, having a rough go of it, but he's a solid guy, a good guy out there in Michigan, and he's a really solid dude, and I wish nothing but the best for him. And whatever you need, Daryl, you just let me know, and I'll help you out. To Jim Woods, Daryl Vanover is his name, by the way. Dan Evans, Scott Williams Collier, and everybody else that listens. If I'm missing you, David Fitzgerald, one of my favorites. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next week.